I'm Paul, this is Vítor. We are from the PPI team, and we really happy to be accepted to come and tell you about what we've been working on for the past while. And also my clicker, for slide clicker, that is not working on his laptop. Don't know why. So Vítor's going to be the slide man as well as the talking man. So yeah, all right. I'll continue. So yeah, that's my Twitter handle. I'm currently contracting at a company called Kairos. You might have heard of them. They're in Bristol, doing a lot of enterprise PHP stuff for the DVSA, the MOT system. Like all your cars get checked on. Open source. I do a bunch of stuff. Probably mostly known for doing PHP stuff, PHP.NET, the Fig group, and other random things that I end up getting myself into.
I'm Vítor, Portuguese. You can call me Vítor, Victor, stuff like that. I won't understand. Vítor Handel, Noise Labs. Also working in Kairos, and I do some work for Gentoo Linux. And sometimes I do some Python to PHP ports. There's some half Python developers, so I try to do something to PHP. So agenda for tonight. We are going to explain what is PPI, what is PPI made of, so nuts and bolts, and we'll show some practical examples on how to install PPI and how easy it is.
So really, us getting to this point where we can launch PPI, which we're launching version 2.1, it's pretty much stable. I don't know if we've actually marked it as stable, or we can go home tonight and mark it stable and it'll be the official version. But it really couldn't have been possible at all to get as far as we've got without these folks. So I really want to give a shout out to these guys. Rob Allen in the middle there, that's this guy here. He's a good guy from the Zen team. So yeah, Evan and Matthew and Gary and Ben from the Zen team, and Fabian from Symphony, Taylor from Laravel, and Ben Tadier as well, who is here. Where's Ben? He's the guy at the back taking pictures. Yeah, he does a lot of really good contributions. So I just want to say thank you before we go on.
And Jakob, which we forgot at the office.
Yeah, Jakob's at the office because he was waiting on us, and we didn't know he was waiting on us, so we drove here, and he tweeted me like, "Where are you?" And we're like, "In the car." "Where are you?"
So
he's like,
around it.
so he may turn up. Hopefully he turns up. We're really sorry. So yeah, quite a lot of misconceptions or questions people ask me, and one of the first questions people ask me is not payment protection insurance, all right? It drives me mad, and the project existed years before this whole thing came on the TV one day, and it's like PPI, and I'm like, what? What's that? And then yeah, so it's not insurance. We're not here to sell anything or try and take it. Yeah. Specifically, though, it's not a framework that will introduce anything new to you if you're already using PHP and using popular frameworks. And that's a key point. I just want to get a good demographic of, like, you folks and that. So I just wondering if you could quickly raise your hand. Who here does PHP a lot? A lot of the time, so I can get a good. Great. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Who uses Zen framework? Can you raise your hand? Okay, it's probably about 20-30%. Who uses Symphony? A bit more. Okay, awesome. Can you shout out to me what other frameworks these are using?
Silence.
Okay. Anything else?
Laravel.
Yep.
Ye.
Who said that? Yourself. Ye framework. Okay, cool.
Three.
What one?
Free framework.
Yep. Okay, micro. Okay, cool. Anything else?
Cake.
You're using Cake? Okay. All right, good. All right, awesome. So I've got quite a good mixture. People who are, go back. So you folks that have aware that have used Zend or Symphony, there'll probably be nothing you see that you don't know. People who haven't used Zend or Symphony, it's quite easy to pick up anyway, right? But the point is, when you hear about a new framework, typically it's like new. It's very different, and it's different to what you've got right now. And you look at it and you're like, that's very different, and I don't really want to learn a new framework, right? So when we were working on the project, we were like, that's not a goal. Our goal is not to try to create a different framework. For example, see, Symfony existed, and Laravel used Symfony underneath and wrapped on top of it. So what it did is it took Symfony components, but grabbed a new layer on top, which is abstraction. So every time you apply abstraction, you create something new, right? Our goal is not to do that, and we haven't done that. So that's how we've achieved the point of all the knowledge from the PHP community and all the time and effort is completely reusable, and you'll see that will make more sense when you actually see it.
So, PPI, what does it stand for? The truth is, we don't know. So let's try tonight. Maybe it's PHP, interoperability, framework.
That's the best.
And it was created in 2006.
Yeah, I started the project back then. That was, of course, like version 0, and then eventually version 1. And 3 odd years ago, I started PPI version 2.0, and that's obviously progressed. And then Vítor and I have been working for the past 9 months, 10 months on 2.1, and we're ready. It's here now, and we're really excited to bring it to you. And Bristol, you guys are the first community, the first PHP user group community that we're actually showing this to. So, yeah, you are the first.
So tonight we are going to talk about PPI version 2, and more specifically PPI version 2.1, which should be ready soon.
Yeah, define ready, right? We can go to film tonight and say it's ready, or we can try and put more things in it, but we'll see, right?
And very, very important, if you ever ask the question, which is the best quality PPI PHP method framework, which is a common question on the web, that is PPI PHP method framework.
Yeah, basically this came around because Vítor typed in, I guess, PPI framework in Google, and this thing came up, and he showed it to me, and he wanted to put it on the slides, and we're just like, what is this? Who's this? What is this? What does this even mean? I don't even understand it. So we're like, and I'm assuming the guy didn't get a reply, so I don't know. No clue. Okay, right, so of course you're going to make something new. You have to say, well, what does it do differently? What value does it add? No point making another framework, it's pointless, right? So what does it do differently? What does it solve, right? So currently, the way frameworks work typically is it's a one-to-one relationship between the app you're building and the app and the framework that you built your app on top of, right? And what happens is over time, it's more convenient and more suggested, recommended to, as your app grows, to use the tools and the toolkits that the framework you're building on top of has provided to you, all right? So if you're building a cake app, you'll use the cake router, right, for taking routes. And if you use Symfony, a Symfony app, you use Symfony returns in. You know, it's a one-to-one relationship, right? And over time, as your app matures, it's difficult to get away from that. And if you want to take code from another project and apply it, you can't if it's in a different framework or a different version of the framework. So that is commonly known as vendor lock-in. Has anybody heard of this? Because I kind of half made it up and looked it up, and it was a thing, right? So there's like 2 to 3 hands, right? Yeah, all right. So, yeah, he doesn't like the slide. I was like, okay, make something better. All right, so I'll describe it a bit better. So, basically, your application, when you choose a framework these days, it's the framework is the first class citizen, and your app is second class. It's like, choose a framework, and then build your app in the framework, right? Inside the framework, effectively. And there's coupling, right? And if you're writing software, you're pretty aware that coupling is an issue in whatever form it may be. In this case, it's app. And then the things that come out of that are, you can't take your app and move it to a different framework because it won't work, right? And it's how do you do that? Or vice versa. How do you take code from other frameworks and put them in your app? and have it work, right? And that's the goal. That's what we achieve, right? We built PPI. 95% of PPI is actually the core components of other frameworks. We reused the framework. We reused the core, the core of the Zen 2 framework and some core parts of Symfony 2 to create the PPI core. So literally, right off the bat, we didn't build anything new. So it's complete reusability of effort, time, community knowledge, which is important. And this is the result what comes out when you solve vendor lock-in. Your app belongs to you and not the framework, which at the moment, it's, for a lot of the time, in many cases, it's flipped around. Depends how far ahead you plan, and you can sometimes do your best to get away from vendor lock-in as much as possible, but it will always keep bringing you back in, sucking you back in. And because PPI does not build anything itself, right? So what I mean by that, for example, common things you use in frameworks like templating, routers, modules, right? We didn't build anything ourselves. Because if you build something yourself, it's a new framework, right? It's a new concept. So you have to learn it, it's right? So we made a point of not doing that. As a result, right now, we're, this the number 2 stack, right? You've got like Symfony 2, Zen 2, other frameworks on 2, and then these frameworks at the moment are working on version 3, like Slim 3 as well. And the point with PPI is that it's a centerpiece, and it doesn't actually do anything itself. So what it means is you don't have to switch what your app looks like in order to use a new version of a framework, because you're outside of the frameworks effectively, and PPI will consume them in for you, and you do what you want. Tell PPI what you want to do, and it'll do it for you. So we've got all the 2 stack. These things come in, no problem. You don't have to. There's no upgrade plan. There's no nothing. PPI is like glue, not like glue. I mean more sense later on, but it's just fine on.
So what we use to build PPI, the core components use Zen framework, the service manager, the model manager, and the event manager. And from Symfony, we borrow the routing, the templating for providing the views, also debug for the messages, the console and configuration, and also HTTP to match our requests, and also the Symfony CMS router, which will provide us with a chain router. So this is the core components right now of PPI, and it's built on the shoulder of giants.
Yeah, effectively. One of the last things I read is I'll come back to you.
So PPI takes advantage of PHP fixed standards, and our goal is to provide a friendly environment so you can drop in components from every vendor, and they'll just work, because they will follow implement the interfaces from PHP fixed standards. So the components that you can plug in into PPI, some of them are PSR ready, and other are potential candidates. One example is the router, which is already included in PPI. So what we want to do is provide real-life proof of concepts for these standards. So we already use router interface, cache interface, and they are already stable, used in production, and they might one day be PSR. So about PSRs, what's in and what's coming. Those are the accepted PSRs, as you may know already. All of them are implemented in PPI. And some others are in review.
Caching interface.
Caching interface is something that I worked on for about 2.5 years now on the PHP Fig group with the other members of the Fig group. So caching interface is not in review yet, but it's on the path to review. And PSR7, there's the next talks about that. The only thing to add here is that frameworks are not really in production yet using 6 and 7 because they don't exist yet. They're not official standards, but we are already using them as standards because in advance, right? And then when the standards do get officially, the stamp is ready, release it, we're already there. We're already using it in production, and we can give real-life examples and the flaws on it, right? So it's just thing to add with these 6 and 7. Okay, so yeah, the PSR cache is when it was starting out and I was contributing it was actually a lot of inspiration came from PPI 1. PPI 1 at that time was about 7 years old, and had a very strong cache module. And what I did was I ported when making PPI 2. I said, I'm not just going to copy and paste and put a 2 stamp on it. I'll actually refactor the PPI 1 component to adhere to the interfaces and the way of the PSR cache standard. So right now, this is a very close representation of what's in PSR cache, which is not yet launched, but it's launched in PPI. And it's been here for a few years now. So if people want to start playing around with the PSR cache or want to do caching, this guy is in there. And these are currently just a bunch of handlers that have been there for years, like, legacy.
Other thing that we are working late with is the PSR7 support, HTTP message interface, and PPI is PSR7 ready. This means that you can bring libraries once they implement PSR7 into PPI, as it's already using request response interface. And this means that PPI will provide the bridge for consuming other frameworks like Zen and Symfony or
the 2 series that don't yet support PSR7 PPI does what PSR7 achieves, it bridges the gap. So for now, and when those frameworks catch up, or Slim's already caught up, that's what Rob's going to talk about as well. The ones that haven't caught up, so when those ones do catch up, then we can just throw away a lot of code because we don't need it anymore because they're 7, right? It's a good day. It's a good day where you can just delete code and you're in a better place.
So let's show some code. Oh, not yet. Let's show that PSR7 is going forward, which is very good for us. Very good news. This is very, very recent. And now we use PSR HTTP message in our composer.json to pull the latest version, which is 0.11.
PPI. The PPI request in the framework extends Symfony requests because it's a very powerful request component. And so we extend Symfony, but we also implement PSR7 at the same time. So not only can we send the request object around your code, and also in Symfony code that already exists in the wild, we can also send it to PSR7 compatible systems as well. So we've got the full spectrum of that Symfony, heavy Symfony, and anything that will do 7. So that's just a class definition of what our request system looks like.
Actually, we didn't want to wait for Symfony, so we just had to provide our own implementation so far. But once Symfony provides PSR7 compatible HTTP request class, we can just use it
And throw away a lot of code.
But it's passing all PSR7 tests, which is very good. And about PSR7, we are not giving any more details tonight.
Because the next talk is on that topic, and we didn't know.
If you want to ask something, and this is broken now.
Because Gary is not here tonight, because he's sick, unfortunately, so Rob's stepping in, so ask this guy anyway, or ask this guy. Okay. So we're getting more technical as the talk goes on, right? That's the more theory. The theory's gone. We're going to get into the details. What is a module in a framework? Well, there's core components of what a module consists of, and then you've got all the extra fancy fringes that you can add on depending on what your module's trying to do. These are pretty much the 4 parts. Services just means your app code, the domain, what your app's supposed to do, right? So, yeah, next. So what does a module look like in PPI? It uses the Zen 2 for services. So all your modules using the service manager because it's a very, very powerful module management service manager component. We use that. The result of that is that any module in Zen Framework 2 is effectively droppable into PPI 2.1 because it is PPI 2 is Zen 2 for modules and for the services, right? So a lot of code can be reused. Not every module can be dropped in because that's theoretical, but for the most of them anyway, I don't know what they're going to do. Routers. So typically, we go back a few slides, and you remember I said it's a one-to-one relationship. So if you're building an app, you typically use the router that's in that framework, and that's what all your modules look like. Well, PPI breaks this coupling and actually lets your module be the first class citizen and make the decisions and tell the framework or tell PPI what you want to do and what framework you want to do that in, and off he does it. So right now, we've got Symfony in Aura, latest versions of Symfony in Aura, routers implemented in your modules. So more are coming as we add more. Of course, you can add your custom one if you've got your own custom router or you want to add one later. And go back one. Yeah, and Laravel is coming, but they have no documentation. And I said, Taylor, the lead developer of Laravel, said a couple of days ago he would rewrite me some documentation. So although we could add it in early, I'd rather wait for their docs and then add it in. So it's achievable in the same manner consistently. So it will become next. Templating. And any module you can use these for at the moment, you can add your own in. We're using Symfony templating component. So any existing code that's built in Symfony, in the Symfony framework, or just using the Symfony component in the wild for templating, you can copy and paste it, and there's no change. It's a one-to-one representation. It is Symfony, right? There's no abstraction. It's the raw form of Symfony templating. So we have provided in these four already, and if people want more, then we'll add it, or people can help add it for us. Go back a slide. I just want to stop because it's got a lot of detail we just introduced here, and I'm wondering if you have, anything you want to clarify, anything that you're thinking about, how does it do it, or what do you actually mean? I don't quite understand it so far. Any questions? Sure.
Running a custom router, you have to write a bridge, effectively between. So does PPI already provide bridges for Laravel, Symfony, or your standard? Is that correct? So you write your own bridge for your own router?
Correct. And later slides will go into detail about how a router works and how you would go about adding that into the chain router, which Vítor mentioned we're using Symfony CMF chain router. So again, we didn't build a chain router. We just extended the chain router to achieve this such functionality. So, yeah. So you'll see it makes more sense more. So.
How do you, you've obviously got different frameworks here. How do you just take the router from one and then template from another? How do you, because you can't just vice versa now go to, I suppose with Symfony components and stuff you can.
If it's a component, you can consume it. So like what?
But are there like more coupled frameworks that are harder to sort of
Correct, and that's why you don't see more list. Cake PHP, it's in development. There's a new version coming out soon, or has been, and I've yet to look at it in detail. But I go around all the frameworks and say, okay, Symfony and Zen are very well developed frameworks, so you can take components and consume them. Others are not there yet. Like Cake was one mentioned because it's quite an old framework. Cake 2, yeah. If a framework is designed well as components, we can take any component and put it in here. If it's not designed well, then it's that's a coupling issue. That's their software is not flexible enough. Hello.
what versions of Laravel have you covered?
4 and 5 any day. We want effectively we want to support 4 because it's quite long-term support. But well, it's a lot of code in the wild for 4 and 5 any day. That's the conversation I was referring to with Taylor about documentation. I wanted to add Laravel router for 4 and 5, and there was no docs. So I'm like, well, so when they had docs, we'll put 4 and 5 in, and anything else. So maybe we're open to suggestions as well to see, what the demand or what people would like, right? Because we're just guessing what we'll go for the most popular, but there may be more out there, right? There's a lot of routers out there, some better than others. Yep, go for it. Okay, a little bit on top of your question was just how does it achieve it? How does it do it? PPI mediates information through to frameworks. So your module, first class citizen, then you tell PPI what you want. So you give it something, you give it a list of Symfony routes or Aura routes, and you say, here PPI, take this, and he will mediate it. So PPI is a mediation framework, kind of, don't really know what it is, so I can't really describe it in one word, but it mediates information straight through to the original framework that you're wanting to use. The original framework doesn't know that PPI is talking to it. It thinks it's in its own framework. It thinks you are writing an app and natively in that framework. And then it does whatever it would natively do in that target framework. And then returns it back to PPI, and PPI looks at it and go, okay, and then it does whatever it's supposed to do. Right? Either return it back to you or do an action like dispatch or whatever it is. Right? So that's how we achieve it. You want to talk a bit?
Sure. So PPI framework consumes several modules, and for each module, you can use service using that framework. And module number 1 can use routing from Symfony.
And this is an example of a REST API module. So if you want to build an API, you don't need extra things like templates and stuff because you're returning, say, JSON or whatever, XML, right? So PPI evaluates modules on a per module basis. So it's not, again, not one-to-one. It's not one router for all your modules. Every router can be completely independent and make its own decisions, right? And you can bring modules in. And again, so you're no longer coupled to a specific framework. You can, the module can do what it wants to do. PPI, again, evaluates on a per module basis. So that's the emphasis here, that we only do routing because it's an API module. Next. Number 2.
For module number 2, you can actually use the routing and view from Symfony because the configuration is per module. It means that each module can pick its own routing component. This one is picking up from Symfony.
So it's a full stack application. So you've got a front end, right? It's a website. So that's why I use views also.
And for module number 3, you can actually pick views from Laravel in the system and keep using the routing from Symfony. So for each module, you have the ability to pick the vendor that you actually want to use for each layer of your application.
And we only had room on the slides for 2 frameworks, but effectively it doesn't matter. You can have as many frameworks as you like. Right. Okay, router. How did we achieve it? Well, there wasn't a PSR for routing, right? It's been proposed and then decided not to do it. So I had to make an interoperability layer between frameworks for their routing stuff, right? So yeah, and hopefully someday if there is a routing PSR that all the frameworks can start adopting, then this is a good candidate for it because it'll be used for a while. Yeah, it just mediates. Next, everything is. Okay, so you asked a question about how does it do it, adding your own router. Like what would I need to do? Actually, it's yourself, sorry. This is what it looks like. All right, so this is the PPI chain router, very thin layer on top of the Symfony CMF chain router. This is the native router that you would use in Symfony, or the Symfony uses inside of itself. Again, the native Aura router and Laravel, and you can keep going and going and going and going. And what you do is you just create a very small wrapper that you can put into the chain. Effectively, it's a stack, and it iterates down the stack and match until it has a hit, or you get a 404 in the end, right? So that's just an example of how we achieve interoperability, multi-framework stuff. So that's a good example to show how we do it in other areas of what frameworks do.
So some practical examples now. Pretty easy to install. Because we are in the 21st century, you can just use Composer. Simple as Composer create project, and it will download a Skeleton app, pull all dependencies, and you're good to go. And we also provide a vagrant box, which is very, very useful.
That's Ansible powered, so you don't have to use it, but it's there. So you don't actually have to install Apache on your machine or do anything. You literally just type vagrant up. You don't even need that, actually, it's optional, but we use it to make it clear if you've got multiple vagrants on your own computer. But yeah, type vagrant up, and it will just spin up a virtual machine on that, and there's no configuration, and you've got a working application ready to go that you can start writing code. So there's no, you don't need to configure Apache or MySQL or whatever. It's just pick it up, and that is it. It's there for convenience, right?
And then, it's called an app. Thank you, Brian.
The colour didn't come out quite good on this. It looks slightly differently colour-wise. But yeah, when you type Vagrant up, or you configure up your own Apache thing, and you go to the URL that's in the docs, you'll see the skeleton app, and it'll be like, blah. So yeah, it's just showing you that's what it will look like when you install it.
And it includes already some examples of using several templating engines, so you can start and look at what's inside already and picking up your components.
We didn't put a slide about the checker, so maybe it's not your laptop, so I can't show the checker. Never mind.
So this is our front controller. We make use of Composer, obviously, by using ini.php for auto-loading. And then you have the ability to configure your environment. So we are passing to our app, which is the application, our kernel. Environments that you can enable or disable debug to control your stack traces. And we also provide the path to the root tier, which contains configuration, which is then here. You can use it. We provide PHP configuration files and also YAML. Sorry, not XML.
Yeah, that's correct.
Handle requests, app run.
So we use Send for modules and for services, but we use Symfony for config. Symfony config. So therefore, that's what Symfony does. If you point it, if you just type, if you change that to app.yaml, it would just parse it. You don't have to say, this is a YAML parser, or it detects the extension and it will do it. That's consistent, not just in this index file, anywhere in the framework. Like if you're in a module, because modules have config, you just say, this is my module config. This is the path, the config file for this module, and it's the same thing. So yeah, we're using Symfony here. When it boots up the modules, it will boot up. That's Zen2 kicking in, and it will just boot up, and then you're in your.
Actually, if you use YAML, it parses both Symfony way of writing YAML. They have some specific include rules.
You can have like sub YAML files and stuff like that, and that all natively works as well
And
in
it
here.
works also for Zen framework, so it supports both. You can pick whatever you want.
Yeah.
It works.
This is what a PPI module looks like. If you've used Zen2, this is a Zen2 module as well, effectively. We've got a little bit of differences. So when you download the skeleton app, this is what the module that it comes with. This is what it looked like, and it's really just to show you that module.php is what gets loaded when your module. For your folks that are not familiar with how Zen2 works, module.php, that's it. That's a module. If you've got a module.php file, it's a module in Zen2. So we'll go next slide. You'll see what's inside a module. But effectively, config, roots. Again, these are here. You could do aura.yaml or symfony.php, and you don't need to do anything different. PPI picks it up. And for views, we're using Symfony templating, and Symfony templating has a feature that you can say, look at the extension of the file, and then therefore trigger that templating engine. And we support these 4. So depending on what your module does, or not your module, and on a controller basis and an action basis, you can use a different templating engine. You don't have to use Twig for everything, or Smarty or PHP. If your system's using Twig, because Twig's a very powerful templating engine, but you've got an API, an AJAX request that comes in, and you want to just like spin out some markup, then Mustache is perfect for that because it's tiny, it's lightweight. You don't have to spin up Twig because Twig's quite heavy in comparison. So you can use what makes sense for that specific HTTP request, not just the one templating engine for your whole module or for your whole app. So it's, again, per request basis. Yeah, and this is just source folder. And so this was on the website, some code. And again, like you would expect, just controllers, right? Quite typical. This is what module.php looks like. In Zen Framework 2, they have a method called getConfig. So therefore, it's also a Zen 2 module, but we have this guy on top. Zen does routing in a different manner. It doesn't ask the module for the routes, it gets from somewhere else. In PPI, the module takes control, not the framework. And it says, here's the routes. And as you can see, right, it's very simple. It implements a base class. So the base class is where the work gets done. And yeah, it's very basic, right? Load all our routes, load symphony routes, and bang, it just works.
So, if you still want to know more,
This is from a movie called Starship Troopers, if you don't know. It's pretty cool. Yeah, it's his idea.
we use Gitter now. Anyone uses Gitter here?
Or Slack, using Slack at all. Cool. Gitter is like Slack, but for GitHub projects. So it's very targeted and awesome.
But we still are on IRC, always. And you can drop us a line on Twitter on PPI Framework or Dragoonis or the Nice Labs.
Yeah, of course. If you're trying a PPI, you are the first, community, Bristol community, or thereabouts, using this. So if you are picking it up and you do notice a problem, just jump on the chat. It's web-based. You can go on your phone. You can do it on your laptops, and just say, "Hey, I tried to use it, but there's this silly error," and it could be your machine doesn't have something installed, or we need help to make our docs better, or there's something we have to fix, right? So we definitely appreciate any feedback from using it, whether you're planning on using it long term or further than whatever. But we would really appreciate feedback on your thoughts outside of the talk, or thoughts on using it, or anything. We would just love to hear what you think and stuff. So, yeah, that's it. We think we bang on time with how much time we had to talk. So that's quite convenient. And there's the missing man called Jakob from the Symphony project. So Jakob's some of the Symphony core team, and we left him at the office. So we're really sorry. You turned up at the right time. We're all done. Yeah, just questions really. Anything that you want to talk about? Conversation?
So I was wondering, how does it work with versioning? So do you only support one version of every module, or do you support multiple ones, and how much of a pain it is? So for example, if I don't know, a new version of something from Symphony comes out and people still want to use the older one, do you support them for?
Yeah. You can do what you like because they're decoupled. So it depends on what you're trying to achieve, actually. It has to be taken on a case-by-case basis, but for the most part, there is no coupling on the version of the framework because we have a mediation layer which it goes through, and then what you're going through to could be a version A or version B or version C. It doesn't matter. You just tell PPI, here, do this for me, but do it in this, target this guy or target that guy.
So more on the user to upgrade the components rather than the framework, right?
Maybe yes, maybe a bit of both. Maybe it just depends exactly what you're doing. It's quite kind of conceptual without a good use case. But yeah, I don't see it being an issue.
What would be perfect for us is just PSR compatible.
Yeah, and then it doesn't matter what version.
For example, if I use PPI with, I don't know, something from Laravel, and then a new version of that came out. So I think, as a user, I'd like the framework to kind of take care of it and upgrade it, because it's nice to use the latest version.
So it wouldn't upgrade it for you, but it would definitely let you use both or one or the other, right? So you're like, Laravel 4, I'm using it for my app, but it's got a cool new feature in 5, so let's load in 5 and use that factor, right? As long as you design your system where they're decoupled, there's no dependency too much. If you just decouple them from design, then that's it. If the design's good, the rest of the system works well.
Does it not have to mediate differently if the framework changes very fundamentally between versions?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you handle that between versions.
Yeah, if they change fundamentally how it works, then you have to change fundamentally. Either we, as in the PPI team, have to change fundamentally how it works inside to try and make it is the least effort for you as a developer if it's not your responsibility, but it's a kind of framework or engine responsibility, right? Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So,
Are you seeing much sort of performance overhead of stacking in all these different frameworks?
yes and no. The point is everything's lazy loaded in the system because we use Zen2's service manager, and that's by design lazy loaded. So it only invokes things that you use. So even if you've got the potential to use all these different frameworks, it won't actually do anything with them until you say do it, and then it will go and load. If you were in a Symfony app and you say do some routing, well, that's all PPI does. It says do some routing. Again, PPI is like 5%, and then 95% is what you're using in the first place, right? So it's a small mediation layer. It's very minimal, but you know, performance is something I have to constantly look at, and there's always room for improvement. As you upgrade your PHP versions, this becomes less of an issue because we get 5.5 with op caching. This is much better than before. 5.6 is a performance boost. I think it's 15% performance boost just by using that extra version. And then when you go to 7, you're talking about 200%, you know, because 7 is twice as fast as 5, right? So again, you upgrade eventually to that. It's something you have to think about less and less. PHP by design is stateless, so it spins things up and then it throws them away real quick. So even if there was a slight overhead, it would be disappear from memory anyway, right? It's quite different to other systems like Java, which like persists in memory and stays there. PHP, that's why PHP scales very well, because it's just spin up and then just chuck it away, right?
Can you actually access the things that make each component different, or do you have to access them through the interface you're providing?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, I might not have understood something, but
Cool.
I'm wondering why I would use this rather than just using Composer to pull in the packages myself.
You both actually, PPI includes things that it makes available to you, but it is Composer. We're using Composer, and you can, in your app, the app can dictate to PPI what it's pulling in, right? So yeah, for example, if you don't, how conscious of time actually? Is this okay, question time, or are we like totally overrun? Okay, sorry, last question. What are we talking about? I don't know.
I'll ask you later.
Sure, we've got plenty of time. We're going to go to the, what's it called? What's the pub called?
No, I've got the talk.
No, I meant.
Oh, right, yeah, the Apple, yeah.
Okay, if you're going there, we can chat more. Cool. Well, I think we're out of time, so yeah, just the chat link, and if you want to chat more. But thanks.